like to start with a question to us all, whose answer I don't have. And the question is, why are we here at Radisson Blu Lusaka today? What will be different about this gathering? I'm sure each one of you has attended multiple gatherings that have talked about unconstitutional changes of government this year, whether in-person gatherings, whether hybrid, whether virtual. This is not the first. At the level of the AU, as we've been told, there was a PRC retreat in Accra. That was in March, I believe, 15th to 17th March. There was an extraordinary summit. That was in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea on 28th May. So what will be different about today? That's the question to us all. I'll introduce the four panelists up front so that we don't interrupt the conversation so much as it goes on. The first topic we were to discuss was insights from the African Union's Reflection Forum that was held in Accra in March 2022, and also from the Extraordinary Summit that was held in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea in May 2022. This was to be delivered by our sister, Ms. Abibata Tientaga Bari, but she was not able to make it. So stepping into her place and stepping up from second on the program, not in other things in life, will be my big brother, Ambassador Dr. Salah Siddig Hammad. Salah, as you heard in the opening ceremony, is currently the head of the Secretariat of AGA-APSA, the African Governance Architecture and the African Peace and Security Architecture, situated within the Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security at the African Union Commission. The second topic was meant to be the role of the African Governance Architecture in implementing AfDB, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. That was initially to be delivered by my brother Salah, but now stepping up to the plate is one of the dynamic women in democracy, governance, peace and security on the continent, my sister, Ms. Makda Tessema, who is currently senior expert in the governance, democracy, and human rights within the same AGA Secretariat. Then coming up after her will be the topic on the engagement of the African Development Bank in states in transition and supporting civil society-led operations amidst unconstitutional changes of government. And this will be the case study of the Economic Community of the West African States, ECOWAS. And there the discussion will be led by my brother, Mr. Luther Yameogo, who's the Principal Advocacy and Partnership Officer at the African Development Bank. And then coming up to shore up the role of the citizen, the girls and boys, the women and men of Africa, will be the topic of civic engagement in democracy and governance, the role of ECOSOCC, the Economic, Social and Cultural Council of the African Union. And there will be led by my brother, Mr. Emmanuel Safa Abdullahi, who's currently the chairperson of the Political Affairs Cluster of ECOSOCC. Emmanuel is also a practicing lawyer in Sierra Leone and the managing director of Abdullahi and Associates Advocates, also known as Luawa Chambers. He's a very active human rights activist, a founder and executive director of the Society for Democratic Initiatives, SDI, for the last 12 or so years. And 8 years ago, and I didn't know this, he also established the Luawa Football Club, which he heads. So we'd like to hear about that now or later. So without further ado, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to make introductory remarks of 10 to maximum 15 minutes, just so that we have enough time for interactive debate. Maybe that's one of the things we could do differently in this conference. So I welcome you, Salah. Would you like to speak for me, or it's up to you? Yes, ma'am.
So the forum took place on 15th, 17th March 2022 in Accra, Ghana, and it was graced by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana. And in presence were member states, representative of member states, members of the Peace and Security Council, members of or representative of civil society, representative of the academia and the media. The Reflection Forum in Accra discussed a number of issues. One, the normative frameworks that addresses issues related to unconstitutional changes of governments, as well as the possibility of guidelines on constitutional amendments. Why on constitutional amendments? Because we have also been witnessing as a reason for unconstitutional changes of governments in Africa what is called the manipulation of constitutions on the continent. The forum also addressed the role that could be played by the regional economic communities, as well as civil society, media, and academia in preventing unconstitutional changes of governments from happening on the continent. The forum received or addressed or discussed a number of papers that were submitted by experts. I'm not going to go into the details of each and every paper, but let me just give you some highlights on issues that were discussed, mainly the role of civil society, academia, and media. All the stakeholders, all participants of the forum agreed that the civil society has a very big role to play in preventing unconstitutional changes of governments from happening on the continent. That prevention or that support of civil society could be through the advocacy and lobbying for ratification, domestication, and implementation of AU instruments at the national level. Civil society also plays a very strong or very big role in raising awareness of the existence of all of these AU instruments at the national as well as the local level. Civil society could also raise awareness about the instruments that are promoting and protecting human and people's rights on the continent, and civil society also play a role in promoting and advocating for the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the AGA, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. The media also has a role to play in promoting the instruments I mentioned, but also the media plays a role in raising the awareness of the African citizens on the existence of all of these instruments. And of course, media also can be a very strong and important tool in the advocacy process of promoting democracy, good governance, rule of law, and constitutionalism at the national level. The Ghana Forum concluded by issuing a Ghana Declaration, Accra Declaration. The declaration highlighted in many of its provisions the strong role that could be played by civil society, media, and academia in promoting democracy, good governance, rule of law, and also the promotion and protection of human and people's rights in Africa. The document also requested the ECOSOCC to organize a number of consultative forums that bring civil society together in order for the African citizenry voice to be heard. And of course, this forum today is an implementation of the the Accra outcome statement. Civil society also could be could play a very essential role in advocating for good governance, democracy, and rule of law at the national level, simply because they are part of many networks at the national and local level, but also because they are linked and connected to the African citizens at the grassroots level. And that is another venue or platform for civil society to utilize in advocating for the promotion and protection of the human and people's rights, as well as the promotion of good governance, democracy, and rule of law. The outcome statement of Accra, or the Accra Declaration, was presented at the 16th extraordinary session of the Assembly, which took place on the 28th of May, 2022 in Malabo, Republic of Equatorial Guinea. Member states, heads of state and governments received or welcomed the Accra Declaration and emphasized the role that could be played by all stakeholders, including civil society, and once again requested ECOSOCC to proceed with the consultations that are planned to involve the African citizenry in the process in order for the voices to be heard, and directed ECOSOCC to share the outcome documents that will emerge from the consultations that will be taking place, including this one, with the African Union policy organs during the appropriate sessions of the Executive Council as well as the Assembly. The same summit urged the Peace and Security Council to reactivate its subcommittee on sanctions, because there was a call by civil society in Accra that this important subcommittee, which is part of the structure of the Peace and Security Council, must be reactivated in order for it to exercise sanctions against member states that are under unconstitutional changes of governments. That was a direct implementation of civil society recommendation made during the Accra meeting. Before I conclude, I would like to quickly make a few recommendations on the way forward that could enrich the discussion that will follow. Number one, the civil society in Africa must be given the space that it deserves to play its role and to fulfill its mandate, especially for civil society organizations that are in the area of democracy or promoting democracy, good governance, and rule of law. Also, a special focus should be given to youth and women. Youth, because they are the majority of the African citizens, and women because they have been missed from the radar screen for so long, and certainly Africa can't really develop without the participation and engagement and empowerment of the African women. Thirdly, the African citizens must be engaged in the governance affairs at all levels, and their voices must be heard. And African citizens and civil society must play that role of an early warning processes to alert the regional economic communities and the African Union of any possible coup d'etat or any unconstitutional changes of governments at the national level. Fourth, civil society and the African citizens should also play a role, especially those who have the information, in the awareness raising campaign that the African Union is calling for. So then the African Union will become aware, the African citizens, will become aware of the existing instruments that we currently have at the continental as well as regional level. Fifth, it is important also that the African citizens are informed, so information sharing is critical. And here the role of the media and the social media must be recognized and supported. The last point that also I would like to highlight before I conclude, that there is really need to strengthen the relationship between the regional economic communities and the African Union as the continental organization. And we cannot just call the regional economic communities building blocks without really a real relationship that must be in place. We have seen some situations where regional economic communities intervened without the support of the African Union. We have seen also some situations where the African Union intervened without any backing from the the regional economic communities, and in both situations, the results were not really very good. But in fact, in the situations where the African Union, together with the regional economic communities, intervened, the results were extremely successful, like in the case of the Gambia, for example. So we really need to advocate for more synergy, partnership, and coordination and collaboration between the African Union and the regional economic communities. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the African Union certainly will be listening to all comments and inputs that will be made today and for the next 2 days. And we will really hope that by the end of this exercise, there will be an outcome document that could be presented to our policy organs to address once and for all this issue of unconstitutional changes of governments, including manipulation or changes of constitutions, and any other issues that are threatening democracy, good governance, and rule of law on the continent. There's something that there's a note that I'm going to leave you with, something that came to mind, that I think we should also pay attention to what is called the silent unconstitutional changes of governments. Some countries, they look really good from outside, but in fact, inside, there are so many changes that are happening, not in favor of promoting democracy and good governance on the continent, and they could be classified as timing bombs that could explode at any moment, at any time, and then cause threats and damage to the peace and security stability of the continent. So this is again something that we can debate during this discussion and try to include it on the list of issues that we need to focus on. This will be my contribution for now, and I remain ready to receive any questions or comments or inputs. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
So Salah said many good things, which I do not intend to all summarize here. Just 2 observations. I really encourage that as a member of an intergovernmental body, you've highlighted the importance of protection of civic space. Because civic space is under attack in most, if not all, of our countries. And you've talked about its importance. And I'd just like to challenge us all, not necessarily Salah. Yes, we as citizens are trying to protect our space online, on the streets, in courts, at national, regional, continental levels, engaging parliament and so on. But what is the role of the other AU organs, institutions, and specialized agencies in raising this issue of civic space? For the African Commission, we know they issue press statements, press releases, petitions, letters to our heads of state, and so on. But what about the others? What's the role of the others? Secondly, Salah has brought out the importance of the role of citizens in early warning. But we know in our continent, the problem is not early warning. The problem is early action. So what is the role of citizens in early action? What more can we do? There are more military coups d'etat than we agree or than we admit to. When a couple of soldiers from some fringe battalion overrun the city and kick the incumbent out of office, we call that a coup d'etat. But what about when you have an election conducted by an incumbent, but is literally a military operation? Citizens are bludgeoned on the streets in the run-up to the election. The opposition candidates are bludgeoned, frequently incarcerated. In one case, even locked up in his own house for his own good, as though he doesn't have freedom of movement. Citizens are abducted by unmarked vehicles, by security operatives who are not wearing uniform, who do not present arrest warrants, who then go and dump them in military barracks and subject them to military trials, even though they are citizens. What is that? That is a military coup d'etat by an incumbent. So then the question, both to AU organs and institutions, but also to us as citizens, what do you do in terms of early action when a head of state, an incumbent, has committed an unconstitutional change of government? Those were not Makda's questions. Makda's question was, what's the role of AGA in implementing ACDEC? So welcome, Makda.
Yeah, I was talking about the misconceptions that I would like to address before going into my presentation. That misconception is the AGA or neither the AU does not implement the African Charter on Democracy, Governance and Elections. We call it the AGDEC. Now, the African Union does a lot of things, but it does not implement. The burden of implementation of charters lays upon the member states that have signed and ratified and have agreed to put the law into part and parcel of their land. The AU, but also the AGA, through the AGA, have a critical role to play in terms of AGDEC. Most importantly, it's operational state reporting mechanism, but also in promotion and encouragement and the AGDEC for signature and ratification of the AGDEC, but also most importantly, providing technical assistance to member states so that if they have any obstacles in relation to ratification or state reporting, then member states can now, move on from that hump, try to ratify, try to provide state reporting for that convention. So that's one of the things that the African Union does through the African governance architecture. But the African Union can enforce, and you've seen examples of enforcement of the AGDEC, especially for those 4 countries that have been suspended. Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Sudan have now been suspended, but now currently, recently, ECOWAS has now brought back Mali. To be honest with you, all of them have ratified AGDEC. So hopefully in our discussions, then we'll be able to figure out what's happening in our member states, even though they have ratified AGDEC, even though they have made it part of the law of the land, what is going on in our member states that are experiencing unconstitutional changes of government. In terms of the AGA, let me just take you through a few bullet points of why the AGA was established. It was established in 2011. It's a platform for dialogue between various stakeholders. We call them the African Governance Platform. The AGA is inspired by the Constitutive Act of the Union, but also one of the core documents of AGA is AGDEC, as well as the Shared Value Declaration of 2011. Now, the platform, which is an institutional mechanism of AGA, it consists of 11 organs and institutions of the African Union Commission mandated to work on democracy, governance, and human rights, plus the 8 regional economic communities, inclusive of ECOWAS, COMESA, IGAD, etc. The platform has a bureau. It's composed of a chair, a vice chair, and a rapporteur. It revolves on a 2-year basis. Current chair of the African Governance Platform is the SCHPR, based in Banjul. The vice chair is IGAD, and Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department of the African Union Commission stays as a rapporteur, just to keep the institutional memory going. Currently, through the AU reforms, the African Governance Architecture Secretariat, based in Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department, has now transitioned into an AGA-APSA Secretariat. This AGA-APSA Secretariat, the role is the same. It tries to deepen synergy and coordination among the 2 architectures, African Union organs, and also institutions inclusive of the regional economic communities. AGDEC provides a solid framework for the AGA and APSA to be implemented mutually, because they are mutually reinforcing relationships. They have mutually reinforcing relationship between democracy, governance, and peace and security. As a secretariat, of course, like I've mentioned earlier, the promotion of AGDEC for ratification, but also the operationalization of the state reporting mechanism is our core mandate. Before I go into why we need the AGDEC, I just wanted to give you a brief of what the AGDEC is. I'm sure you can read, you can download and read. The AGDEC is available online, but it's an AU instrument that forms a part of a broader policy framework. And it's a response by the AU and also member states to make sure to address democracy, governance, human rights issues, rule of law issues, and also address unconstitutional changes of government. Why do we need an ACTEC? Actually, why do we need a charter? Number one, we need to have an organization that could help in norm setting, and the African Union does the same. It's also an accountability mechanism, and it basically standardizes, at least to a minimum, the protection of democracy, rule of law, human rights, peace, socio-economic development, all of the components that you find in the Charter. And it's a common point of reference, whether it's for member states, for the African Union Commission, or whether it's for you, for citizens and civil society organizations. We have an African document that's a common point of reference. But also it's our own convention, it's our own charter, it's an African charter, it's continentally defined, it's our own identity, and it's African focused. And it creates our own standards of democracy, governance, and election. Funnily enough, the genealogy, when you look at the genealogy of ACTEC, it was meant to be just a declaration, not a convention. But back in the day, I would say ACTEC is an offspring of a historical backdrop that includes, but not limited to, the post-Cold War era, post-colonization, demise of apartheid, military coups in the 1960s. And it arose from all of that historical backdrop. And the genealogy suggests that its development is meant to largely demonstrate the commitment of the African Union and its member states to create a binding instrument vis-a-vis a declaration. Binding instrument, member states are bound by it. Declaration is not a binding. So ACTEC was then needed at that time to deepen and consolidate the rule of law, peace and security and development. But it was also signaled by an important transition of the OAU to the AU, where the role of the organization transformed from non-interference to non-indifference, which is very critical. When we look at the content of ACTEC, and I think it's very critical to look at it, chapters from 1 to 10, 1, 10, and 11 deals with, of course, definition, basic stuff, the mechanisms of application, final clauses. But the meat of the ACTEC stays from chapters 2 to 9, and chapters 2 to 9 deal with objectives, principles of democracy, rule of law, human rights, culture of democracy, elections, and most importantly, sanctions in cases of unconstitutional changes of government. Like I said, generally ACTEC was created to be a legally binding treaty, and it brings all commitments into one document, of course, to consolidate it. ACTEC has also tapped into several important critical normative frameworks, whether it's the Constitutive Act of the Union, Lome Declaration, the African Charter on Human People's Rights, the 2003 Protocol on the establishment of the Peace and Security Council. A lot of these past declarations and conventions have become, in a way, part of the ACTEC. But also it contributes to the bigger vision. We're all contributing to the bigger vision, which is Agenda 2063 for the African Union, but also the global vision of Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. It has concrete cross-cutting themes, and Ambassador Salah has alluded to the fact that it's critical to engage young people, it's very critical to engage women. So all of that has been referred in one way or another in the ACTEC instruments. But then the cross-cutting themes also make reference in one way or another. For example, the protocol on African Charter on People's Rights relating to the rights of women, the Maputo Protocol. It has made its way into the Charter as well. Article 29 of the ACTEC mentions that. Article 31 mentions the importance of engaging young people. Article 27 discusses about the combating corruption and how that's critical for our continent. Article 31 discusses about the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa and their right to engage in politics and democratic governance issues. But also most critically and important for this meeting is the ACTEC itself has mentioned the importance of citizens' participation, civil society participation, and also the private sector, which is mentioned in Article 28 and 30. Now, when we look at the status of ACTEC, the ratification of ACTEC, it was adopted in 2007, January, and it's one of the most ratified, of course, charters in the continent. Out of 55 AU member states, 46 have signed, 36 member states have ratified. Mauritania is the first country to ratify in 2008, and Kenya is the latest country to deposit its ratification document in February 2022. Countries that have not yet signed or ratified include Botswana, Egypt, Eritrea, Libya, Morocco, and Tanzania. When we look at the regional trends, the West African region is leading the pack. 13 out of 15 member states have ratified except Cabo Verde and Senegal. From East Africa, 9 ratification, Comoros, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Rwanda, Seychelles, Sudan, South Sudan, and finally Kenya have ratified. From Southern Africa, which comes third, 7 ratification, inclusive of Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Angola, and Zambia. Standing at fourth from Central Africa, Cameroon, Chad, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Sao Tome, and Principe have signed, ratified the ACTEC. From North Africa, of course, it's a smaller region, 3 ratifications, inclusive of Algeria, Mauritania, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic have ratified the instrument. But then with all of this ratification, we still are looking at challenges of unconstitutional changes of government, popular protest. But what's been happening is one of the questions that I think would need to ask going forward. But before I go into the challenges that have been provided by Ambassador Salah and the previous speakers, I would like to mention a few of the progress that have been made. Whether you recognize it or not, the ACTEC have played a role and democratic governance have been institutionalized, whether it's at the member state level or whether it's in the African Union Commission and also in the regional economic communities. And somehow a culture of human rights have been inculcated, including media freedoms, and also civil society engagement and opening up of the space have been witnessed. Undemocratic forms of governance is not tolerated, and the African Union Commission has also expressed that fact in a very strong way by suspending countries. Multi-party political system have improved. Regular multi-party elections have been done. Democratic transfer of power have been more common, even though we still have problems. Democracy is still on high demand, but in low supply. But in any case, ACTEC has a role to play in all of these progress that has been made. Challenges, we've all mentioned the challenges, and we are here to talk about the challenges, not only challenges, but also try and find solutions. Democratic governance reversals, all colleagues have spoken about it, unconstitutional changes of government, the recent wave that we've been seeing. Intrastate conflict have been prevalent, but also more importantly, currently confrontation between states have been seen, and that potentially could amount to conflict. Election-related violence, we've seen popular protest, but also mismanagement of diversity. We've seen a lot of countries leading ethnic-based politics. Ethnicity is politicized and the other way around. The same when we're talking about civilian versus military establishment drive, militarization of politics, and also vice versa. Corruption, illicit financial flows. The continent has been hemorrhaging, is still hemorrhaging money. State capture has been some of the things that have been witnessed. So we all have all of these challenges, in front of us. In terms of our AGA, and I'm concluding soon, what I would like successes for the AGA and for also the African Union Commission is that we're still providing ongoing technical assistance to member states. And one of the things that have been done is operationalization of the state reporting mechanism. The AGA has received 2 state reports for the ACTEC, but that's something that we can discuss further. In terms of opportunities, I see a lot of opportunities throughout the African Union Commission, but also the African Governance Architecture and APSA as well. The AGA also serves as the Secretariat for the PRC, Permanent Representative Council Subcommittee on Human Rights, Democracy, Governance, and we are working directly with member states to engage them on ratification of ACTEC and also other AU Shared Values Instrument. Currently, we have a meeting planned with them to engage them directly, build the capacity, because sometimes we see that the AU take a lot of the information for granted, but that information sometimes is not forthcoming. In this current seminar that we're organizing for member states, we plan to engage them directly on ratification and reporting of ACTEC as well. But also we're planning an inaugural, very exciting program, a joint Peace and Security Council, PRC subcommittee engagement on democracy, governance, and human rights. And I think it would open all sorts of doors for member states, for AU organs, regional economic communities, but also even society, civil society as well. We envisage a lot of engagement on ACTEC, more specifically with countries that have not ratified, to encourage them to ratify, countries that have not reported, to encourage them to report. At the end, I think the role civil society can play is very critical, and I agree with what Ambassador Salah had said. But raising awareness, I think, where the civil society's strength is raising awareness to advocate for compliance, but working at the national level to increase the need. The African Union is there always to provide technical assistance to member states, and with the support of the civil society organizations, I think we can make it work. We do have several examples of partnerships with ActionAid on ACTEC and also other organizations as well, which I'll be willing to delve into. But I want to leave you and conclude with a question. What are civil society organizations doing to advocate for ratification? I know a lot of work has been done in compliance for ACTEC in their own member states, but also what else is your role? I think would be the question I would throw before I close. Thank you very much, Don.
Many of us have different levels of information with regard to what exactly is provided by the law of the AU, what exactly are the possibilities with the various organs, institutions, specialized agencies of the AU, what exactly are the possibilities with the various architectures. So it is important that we take a little bit of patience every time we meet like this to try as much as we can to bring everybody up to speed on what exists. Again, I won't summarize, but just 1 or 2 highlights. I like very much, Makda, that you raise the importance of celebrating our progresses, however small they may seem to others. There's been quite some progress. We are able to honestly confront our challenges, and we're not afraid of that, but we get energy also from celebrating our progress. I think you've also brought up the importance, like on this thing of ratification campaigns, domestication campaigns, and so on. We reporting to each other on what we are doing. Because in the various countries, in the various sub-regions, CSOs, groups of CSOs, women's groups, youth groups are doing quite a bit. We just don't aggregate all that information together. So I think that's a challenge for ourselves. Makda and also Salah before have brought out AGA and APSA. Now I'd like to pose a question to you, which you can answer or contribute to later. The citizens and the CSOs here have some knowledge of how to engage individual organs and institutions of the AU. They know how to engage the African Commission to a certain extent. They know how to litigate at the African Court to a certain extent, the African Child Rights Committee to a certain extent. They're able to engage the APRM, especially in its national processes to a certain extent. But what we don't know enough of is how do we engage AGA and APSA as an architecture, especially what are the opportunities coming up under these AU reforms that could provide pathways for our direct engagement with the architectures. Then the question for us all, we need to get this information and repackage it in ways in which we can demonstrate and disseminate to our various constituencies back home, down until the urban streets and the rural villages. So what are some of the creative ways we could do that? How could we turn this into art, into cartoons, into videos, and so on, so we're able to disseminate in a way that makes sense to people in the communities that we serve. Without further ado, let me move on then to Luther. As I said, Luther works with the African Development Bank, and he'll give us some conversations around the engagement of ADB in states in transitions and how they support, especially civil society. Welcome, Luther.
Director, I will share quickly about the African Development Bank engagement with civil society, and particularly in a project we are working on where we think that civil society can be a key stakeholder, and where we also think that we will be able to work with the African Union ECOSOCC and to engage the AUCDO as well with some of the methods and tools we are using when it comes to working with states in transitions. But before going through this small project we are working on, I would like to recall, I was talking to my friend Emmanuel this morning, and recalling that the African Development Bank is a bank, but it's a development bank. This means that the bank is working to improve the quality of life of the populations in Africa, which means that all that the bank is doing need to remain people-centered. The bank is known for its I5, the first being Light Up and Power Africa, the second, which is Feed Africa, the third, Industrialize Africa, the fourth, Integrate Africa, but the I55 is improve the condition of life of the populations in Africa. And this is very important, and this is where its engagement with civil society comes from. The bank has a civil society engagement framework, which is now being revamped and which will be now a full civil society strategy 2023-2028. And this is a key message from the bank, confirming the importance of civil society and working with the African population from the bottom of the pyramid. And this strategy will come with a capacity building program. This strategy will involve the first ever bank civil society trust funds, meaning that civil society will be able to apply for funds. So far, there are available funds, but the conditions are difficult. You know that the bank is mainly working with states, but civil society is allowed to apply for some of the fund, but the procurement rules are very tight, and they are most matching with private sector requirements. But with this new trust fund dedicated to civil society, it will be aligned with the civil society actors which are working for the African citizen. The new strategy will also involve what we call now open days, meaning that in your respective member states, you will be able to engage with the bank through civil society open days, where the bank will open its doors whether COVID-19 protocol permits, and where you will be able to know from where and which entry points you are allowed to have within the bank national portfolios. The strategy will also be supported by a communication plan, which is already available through an interactive civil society platform where you can register your organization and be informed on a daily basis about what the bank is doing with civil society. I will share later on the link for the database with the organizer, and they will put it on the screen for you to be able to register your respective organization. Finally, we are organizing 6-7 October, a civil society forum, exactly on the same format like this one organized by the AU ECOSOCC. And we are planning some panels and some sessions with the AU ECOSOCC and other multi-development banks and also institutions I've met with here, which we can invite to share what you are doing for the African citizen. I will now quickly share about the work of the bank in the states in transitions. And my statement is again facilitated by what the previous speakers mentioned. They have already went through the context, the collapse or the disappointment of the citizen about democracy, the ongoing context in Western Africa. They mentioned ECOWAS as well. So quickly, we are working on enhancing the institutional capacities of civil society and local governance of Sahelian countries. This is a pilot project, a pilot initiative we are putting together through the Bank Transitional State Facility. And this first pilot phase has a budget of $4 million US for 2 years, where we hope to work with the AU ECOSOCC again, with the AU CIDO and civil society organization in the Sahelian country. But mainly it will be Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and maybe Senegal. This will be the first round. And later on, we'll be able to replicate and to scale up the successes of this project to the Horn of Africa in 2024, and scale up this project in the Lac Tchad Basin in 2025. Quickly, this proposal and this project we have put together is about supporting civil society organizations for them to come in these countries as not only service providers, like they used to do when they applied to the funding from the bank, but also implementers. We have already discussed with the country managers of this country, and it appears that due to this multidimensional crisis they are facing, for instance, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Mali, the bank is not able to implement all its portfolio. And the bank sometimes has remaining funds. We discussed with them and said, but we have strong and robust civil society organizations which are able to provide humanitarian support. They are also able to provide support and implement some of the projects we have in education, some of the projects we have in healthcare, and some of the programs we have in agriculture. So we have developed a business case showing how civil society can come strong in the implementation of these projects, providing participation, transparency, accountability, mitigating the risk in implementing these projects, and providing impact, strong impact from the base of the pyramid. So this put together has led to the development of this initiative to be implemented starting beginning 2023. We are still working on the paths of this project. And when it will be finalized, we will again link up with the AU ECOSOCC for the implementation and the arrangement. But we will call for proposal for civil society organization in these countries for them to apply and be able to be part of the project. This is also an innovative approach for us to bring in community-based and people-centered approach where community empowerment and community group expertise will be a key asset for the bank. Because for this kind of projects, in this kind of circumstances, where we have countries in multidimensional crisis, we think that having civil society as at the forefront and having civil society as implementers will bring the level of transparency and make this project successful. I think I will stop here because it's an innovative approach. And yes, the bank is engaged with civil society. We have opportunities. We have these pilot projects for which we will be working with you. And I remain available should you have further information requested. And I will not develop further on how we will engage civil society, as I'm sure that Emmanuel will come with how civil society can be strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Luther. I am very, very glad of what the bank has done, and especially that it is piloting this in the Sahel region, and then it's immediately going to follow with the Lake Chad region for a reason. As civil society on the continent, our counterparts coming from Francophone African countries are often not able to access the quantity, the quality, and the diversity of resources, especially external resources that we coming from the Anglophone world can. The major foundations that help small organizations, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, and so on, have a very small imprint in Francophone countries, and especially in Central Africa. So I'm very, very glad that some resources can be availed to our colleagues coming from those countries that can help them build up and maybe move to the next level where they may now have the knowledge, skills, and capacity to go for funding, complex funding like from the EU and so on. I'm very glad on that. The only recommendation I could give is maybe in a rapid manner, work with organizations like WACSI, the West African Civil Society Institute, and Trust Africa, so that they can rapidly build the capacity, especially of the smaller organizations, so they're able to put in competent applications that will gain you funding. Without further ado, let me invite Emmanuel.
Let me start with what my friend Luther had said. I think one of the things I'm supposed to talk about is really how ECOSOCC can situate itself. And I think one of the things that we are going to discuss is how ECOSOCC can become that bigger organization that will build its own capacity to access big funds that you have. Because one of the problems that we have with civil society organizations in the continent is that every time there is a big funding from a multilateral or bilateral organization, they will say, oh, well, a civil society doesn't have the capacity to access it. So it has to go through an intermediary organization that will have to take over overhead costs, etc. So I think this is very important, and I hope my colleagues at the Secretariat will take note of this, that it's important for them to engage in this so that it's not just about accessing the funding, but also about how this funding can be decentralized to national chapters. Let me go to the issue of discussing civic engagement. What is civic engagement? And I know a lot of people here have been talking about issues of civic engagement. I think this is a process in which any individual or group of people can undertake activities that will address public concerns. Now, civic engagement will include various things like community engagement that will bring together political and non-political actions to protect public values or make change in the community. It is therefore very important for us to understand that civic engagement will include and encompass these issues of formal and informal activities like voting, volunteering, participating in group activities, and community gardening. The potential for civic engagement to empower youth and increase their self-determination and give them the skills and self-confidence are enormous. It is therefore very important that for a thriving society, there is a need for people to engage extensively. Now, before I proceed to some of the things I want to highlight, it is important for me to talk about the historicity of civic engagement in Africa. In 1990, there was a conference in Arusha called the Arusha Conference with the theme, Putting the Peoples First. This meeting was convened under the auspices of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and it was attended by over 500 delegates that represented grassroots non-governmental organizations, United Nations agency, etc. Now, out of this meeting, the African Charter on Popular Participation in Development and Transformation emerged, which was adopted and emphasized on the principles that development can only be possible with popular participation and civic engagement. Now, ironically, in the 1990s, Africa was struggling with democracy. At that point in time, civic engagement was calling on the promotion of democracy. Unfortunately, now that we have democracy, civic engagement is now the clarion call for. Democracy is now calling for civic engagement. It seems as if every time we take 2 steps forward, we take 2 steps forward, backward. After the Arusha meeting, several other international instruments have actually emerged. And these instruments have pushed for not only democracy, but civic participation. There are several of these documents, but I will want to hinge on the African Charter on Democracy, Election, and Governance. And if you read Article 30 and 31, it talks about civic engagement. It's not just about civic engagement, but it puts an obligation on the government in Africa to create a space for not just civic engagement, but for a general engagement of vulnerable groups. It is significant for us to understand that this is the route that we are supposed to take. Now, when we talk about civic engagement, I want to talk about the true and false aspect of civic engagement. There are times when we say there's a false aspect of civic engagement, where governments project the appearance that they get support from people. We've seen this in Guinea, when the ousted president wanted to change the constitution. He says the people are supporting me. He gets his supporters to come out. They say we support. And this has been used basically to promote the cult of personality and stifle individual and local initiatives. It is important for us to decipher this from true participation, which we all know, which will seek to present the views of individuals and grassroots people on the issues of public participation. While we talk about civic engagement, we've also noticed that there are a lot of donor support towards civic engagement. And I think African CSOs should be very careful with this, because sometimes the donor funding themselves have their own objectives. And true civic engagement should come from local initiatives. I also want to talk about something which I think the speakers have spoken about, the restriction on civic space. Civil society in Africa, ECOSOCC must ensure that fighting for civic space becomes a predominant issue for everyone. Because without a liberalized civic space, everything we are doing here today cannot stand. Without a liberalized civic space, we cannot engage in governance. And there is a growing tendency for civic space to be narrowed. We also need to talk about the issues of internal accountability within civil society, because governments have used this as an excuse to clamp down on civil society. And I think it's very important for all of us. Let me conclude by listing a couple of points that I think we should engage. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is what William said today in the plenary, that ECOSOCC should engage in national chapters. And for me, it's not just about engaging national civil society organizations, but giving them the voice at this level. So it's important for ECOSOCC not to become the apron of the African Union. While it is an organ, its mandate is bigger than just following the trend. So for example, I mean, there have been instances where there's a political dispute in Sudan, in South Africa, and ECOSOCC members will say, oh, let's wait until the AU takes a position. I don't think that's right. ECOSOCC should be able to do the things that they want to do. ECOSOCC and the civil society should take the threat on democracy seriously and ensure that it becomes a major preoccupation. It is also very important that we just do not engage Agenda 2063, but to interrogate it, to ensure that the people in the communities are aware of it and that they can implement it and also hold their governments to account. I think it's important to work on building the culture of democracy in member states to the point where unconstitutional change of government become a non-issue. I also believe that it is important to tackle the existential question of civic space, which I've spoken about, build a culture of internal and external transparency and accountability. Make the African Charter on Democracy, Election, and Governance the leading advocacy tool in the continent. And most importantly, Luther, I'm coming back to you. Mobilize resources from institutions like the AfDB. Thank you very much.
I have only one observation. One of your recommendations is that ECOSOCC should do more at the country level. And I agree with you. And I think it is incumbent on us all to ensure that we then bestow on ECOSOCC sufficient human resources, technical resources, and financial resources for that doing more. Otherwise, if we don't watch out, the bean counters in Addis will give them exactly the same budget, but they and we will be expecting this more. So this is a call to us as civil society to focus more on the AU budget, monitor it more intimately, and engage in more serious advocacy to make sure the institutions that serve the people have enough resources. With that, I open the floor, ladies and gentlemen. We'll try and take as many comments as possible before we come back to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Maybe also quickly introduce yourself and where you come from so that colleagues can know you.
Thank you. My name is Lillian Alex. I work with the East Africa Civil Society Organizations Forum, and I'm from East Africa region. So I'll thank the panelists for the beautiful presentations and the elaborative discussions that raised. So I'll also apologize to Makda and Ambassador Salah if these questions might be recurring themselves, because I know we have worked through this and we have been discussing this many times. But I'll be very brief and ask 3 questions. And the first one will be about just urging if the AGA platform could engage on sharing the examples or the good examples that have been done by the countries so far that have ratified and are depositing on the AG deck. So far in East Africa, in Africa continent, looking at countries such as South Sudan, Rwanda, and Togo that I know by the time we were actually finalizing this discussion back in 2019, these countries were either preparing to deposit their reports or they had already deposited their reports. So I think it's very interesting to learn from them. And also where I'm raising this is looking at countries such as South Sudan, that we know that the governance structures are not very well, instituted. So would like to learn from them and from the practice that I've done so far. Secondly, my issue was around the power that AGA platform has in holding into account the partner states that we have. I'm seeing, we've gone through this, we have had this discussion on the mobilizing the countries to actually sign, ratify, and implement the ACDEC. But from a number of times we've had this back and forth from the government. Some have reservations and some are not willing to actually sign or ratify these charters. So my question is basically, what is the arm that we can actually use to hold these governments into account for them to see the niche or the importance of having this charter signed in the first place? And thirdly was basically on the also trying to try and analyze the power this charter actually has. We're also learning and also experiencing a number of unconstitutional changes of governments across the continent right now. And I'm just trying to learn, maybe this could also be something that could incite governments to have this charter signed and ratified. To what extent has the AGA come into taking action whenever we have unconstitutional change of governments? Maybe this could be an example to actually understand the importance of having this, because I know it's an instrument that is there, it's a charter that has been put, and I think it's necessary to actually see the action that have actually been done. And finally, this is basically not very much a question. It's on the bank guy, sorry. It's basically just to invite him to East Africa region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Cyrus Munyabranga Musi. From Governance for Africa, it's a Pan-African civil society envisioning a democratic, peaceful, and empowered African society. And I'm from Rwanda. I have one question and a contribution. One, I think, as Makda said, we need to look at the causes of unconstitutional form of governance. Hello? Yes, the background, it's through all our governments were through the revolution from the 60s. And when you see all of the African continent, the revolutionary, the MPLA, from Angola, the NRM and others, I think they have one thing, but there is something we are forgetting. When these talks started in 90s to the first meeting in Nigeria, I think we forgot something. I come from the East African community. For the last 10 years, in East African community now, we are 10 countries. We had 5 generals as presidents. President Kabila, President Neva of Burundi, President Kagame, General Museveni, and even the other 2, Donio from Kenya, you know what happened in 2007. Even those ones that which are not headed by the generals, we know where elections end and the opposition flee away from the countries and where we have the, so what are the causes? I think as my contribution, service delivery. If we don't give basic needs of man to our citizens, who have always riots. And also we need double standards. Even to all the poor countries, not only in Africa. Someone tweeted today that in Sri Lanka, everyone or the big countries are saying democracy in Sri Lanka. But when people stormed in the US, they are terrorists. They are arrested. They are facing prosecution. Number 2, I think inclusion. These charters are signed and ratified. In Rwanda, I think we signed 2006. But do they consult the citizens? The people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs sign, ratify, come back and talk to themselves. Citizens are not a party. So my last question, who is to enforce the implementation of ACDEC with the issue of sovereignty? Even now we have been talking about even one passport. Yesterday when I came, I paid for a visa to enter here in Africa. So who is to enforce the implementation? Even the African Union, they say this is our Secretariat. So these are things we should focus on, what are the causes of this. Otherwise we will keep rotating and repeating the same thing. Thank you.
My name is Walter Kasimba. I am the founder and president of a youth organization called Youth Unite Zambia. That is a pioneering organization that talks about governance and young people and peace and security in Zambia and Africa. My question starts with a statement. I believe we cannot talk about youth inclusion and inclusion overall if we do not deal with the systems that perpetuate seclusion. And some of these systems that we talk about are the same charters that we are talking about. When you look at Article 11 of the Africa Youth Charter, it talks about participation and how young people should be part of the democratic and electoral processes of the African states. But when you look at, ACDEC, you will not see any article that talks about how young people can be part of the process. And this already is not parallel. So my question is, are there provisions in which it is possible to amend ACDEC to ensure youth mainstreaming is a priority on the African continent? Ambassador Salah had mentioned that because the young people are the majority of Africa, of which constitutes over 540 million people on this continent, you will realize that if the young people are not mainstreamed in the decision-making processes of this continent on an implementation level with the laws and policies that we have, we'll continue ratifying these charters and still not see any results. The past few months, we've seen already 5 coups d'etats in Africa. Over 16 nations in Africa are experiencing full-scale civil wars. And we're seated here feeling good, taking nice tea breaks. So it's important for us to be very practical in our approach and ensuring that youth mainstreaming is done. So my question, again, in case you've forgotten, is how are young people going to be included with an amendment of ACDEC and other charters?
My name is Dean Mulozi, and I represent Southern Africa Telecenter Network, Zambia Diaspora Foundation. At the same time, I'm a member of ECOSOCC, Third General Assembly. My question is directed to Africa Development Bank regarding the Comprehensive Agricultural Development Program. As you know that Africa's resources lies in rural Africa, and the number of majority of population lies in rural areas, and we have vast resources. Africa has vast resources in rural Africa, and NEPAD have Comprehensive Agricultural Development Program, which is actually whose theme to boost investment and stimulate growth in the agricultural sector. What have been your challenges in supporting agricultural sector in Zambia vis-a-vis private sector in Africa? What we have observed is that we haven't seen enough investment from the Africa Development Bank related to boosting, particularly small and medium-scale farmers in Africa. And we had engaged the African Development Bank maybe 3-4 years ago. We found that it is quite a massive red tape. It's very difficult to access resources from ADB from the private sector point of view, especially if you are small. So I would like to find out what has been major challenges in supporting CADIP, CADIP in Africa to ensure that Africa's resources are boosted and we achieve the Agenda 2063. The second question is directed to my colleague Emmanuel, who was actually lamenting on the impact or the challenge of bringing AU from continental level to national level. And I'm not going to venture very much on that. I would just like to ask a question. What has been your challenges, the standing committee member, to bring AU through ECOSOCC to national chapter level? Thank you.
Good afternoon once more. My name is Luchembe Chilufia. I'm from within Zambia, from an organization called Alliance for Accountability Advocates Zambia. It's a youth-led and youth-focused organization promoting youth participation and governance. My question is basically on the resources that Africa has and what ECOSOCC and indeed the AU is doing to ensure that these resources are utilized for the benefit of the African. We've talked about the ACTA, we've talked about all the charters that we've signed, and one of the challenges that we'll cite is lack of resources to fully implement some of these commitments that we've signed to. But when you look at Africa, we have enough resources. What is lacking is the issue of accountability and issues of ensuring that these charters that we signed do speak to some of these resources that we have and ensure that at the end of the day, the countries are accountable to their people, but also in ensuring that, for example, the 2063 agenda is pushed or advanced using the local resources. So what strategies is ECOSOCC and indeed the AU putting in place to ensure that these resources are benefiting the African citizens, and indeed they are coming to these institutions like the ECOSOCC to ensure that we advance the agenda of the African Union? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Boniface Tembe. I work for an organization called Southern African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, SACOD, based here in the Republic of Zambia. Chair, allow me to first and foremost commend ECOSOCC for being proactive in organizing this very, very important forum that speaks to a very needy issue for the continent. I think this forum is an indicator of efforts that are being made to ensure that there is a great sense of activism that is fairly consistent on the continent, which is what we need if we are to make progress. Now, that said, just a couple of things, Chairperson. One of the biggest issues that we've noted in terms of the various organs of the African Union, and I must say, including ECOSOCC up until this point, has been the inconsistent and the ad hoc nature in undertaking certain activities. And in our view, that has largely contributed to what I may borrow a terminology from some scholars, contributed to what I may call Afro-pessimism, resulting in an issue whereby when you call people to meet, discuss, you depart, everything is forgotten. And it takes so much time for people to remember what was discussed when we met maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So we are constantly working with catching up, and we are never very proactive. We are never in the forefront of ensuring that we follow up on whatever resolutions that we've agreed upon and that needs to be worked on. So my question, I think, to the panelists that are seated there, I would like to have your insight. To what extent do you feel or think that this issue of demoralization that tends to set into the people of the continent has contributed to some of the issues or problems that we're talking about, specifically the unconstitutional change of government? And maybe just lastly, Chairperson, one of the issues that we've also noted is that the continent tends to have priorities that sometimes make one wonder whether we really mean what we want to do or what we say. I'll give an example. In this country, Zambia, it is largely regarded as a very peaceful country, an oasis of peace, which is to a large extent true, since we gained our independence in 1964. And therefore, there is total neglect when it comes to any support towards peace building work, especially at the level of conflict prevention, because wherever you go, you'll be told, but look, Zambia is not a sexy place, it's peaceful. So why do we need to engage in peace building work? The sexy places where you need to be proactive are those that are troubled, that are facing serious civil strife, chaos, and so on and so forth. So you cannot have a situation whereby you neglect countries that are doing fairly well until such a time when they go under or they become or they face very serious problems. And then that's when you begin to invest in them where peace building or conflict prevention is concerned. We need to have our priorities set appropriately from the very outset. If what is in the interest of the continent is to ensure that there is peace and democracy, we must be in a position to invest in countries that are both at peace, but also war-torn, so that we are not always firefighting. I think we need to move away from this firefighting culture because it's not healthy for us. I thank you, Chair.
My name is Mwila Wang. I'm coming from an organization called Be Relevant Africa, and I am also the Zambian youth representative at the Commonwealth. I think for me, I'll start by first stating that Africa, we've been so good at being a continent that is good at rhetoric. And I think the first thing that I'd like to ask is how can we create an Africa that is beyond rhetoric, beyond summit, and beyond agenda setting? Because when we look at our Agenda 2063, as we have established in Aspiration 3, where we envision an Africa of democracy, good governance, respect for human rights, as well as the rule of law. And also Aspiration 6 goes on to say that we envision an Africa that is people-driven, and that is where we are tapping into the potential of women as well as youth. And when we look at this amazing charter, of democracy, elections, and governance, Article 14.2 goes on to focus on the need for us to ensure that we curb unconstitutional. And when I look at certain countries like Chad, Mali, Guinea, and Sudan, who have ratified this particular charter, we experience unconstitutional forms of governance, as it were. So I think for me, really, as opposed to trying to ask a question, I think I just have recommendations that I would give in order for us. And the first recommendation that I have for me is, number one, funding for civil society. I think there's need for us to boost our resource as regards how we as AGA, as well as the African Union, how we fund civil society organizations, because a larger portion of civil society organizations in Africa are funded by the West. And because of that, they begin to champion a Western agenda as opposed to championing a Pan-African agenda. And even when we talk about the issue, of a charter, it becomes very difficult for them to champion this cause because the funding that they are getting is not even Pan-African. Then the other recommendation that I have is the need for us to intensify domestic integration, even as we are championing regional integration. Last week, we were commemorating the Africa Integration Day. And one of the things that I believe is that even the success of the AFCFTA is wholly dependent on domestic integration level. It becomes difficult for us to have a united Africa when in certain countries we have issues of ethnicity as well as religious divisions. The other recommendation that I have is for society organizations who are in here today. This conversation that we are having is high. If I went on the streets right now, say, do you understand the Charter on Governance, Democracy, Elections? I think many young people knowledge. Do you know what AGA is? Do you understand the African Union? Many of them won't have that knowledge. So for society organizations in here to, I think it's also our responsibility to support the agenda of the African Union or of AGA, because above and beyond, the Africa that we want to see and the Africa that we want to create can not only be created by the African Union, but we also have to see how best we can play in advancing that we all envision for ourselves. Thank you so much.
My name is Henry Kawe from the Media Network on Child Rights and Development based in Zambia. Yeah, it's actually similar to what my colleague has just said. And I would like, first of all, to thank the panelists for their wonderful presentations. If you look at the media landscape in our continent, we are largely dependent on foreign media. So whenever we want to disseminate information, according to what my colleague was saying, it becomes very difficult to ensure that we promote our agenda because the foreign media, global entities have their own agenda. You find that in certain countries that do not agree with their governments, they want to project leaders to be bad. And in certain countries where there are certain human rights abuses, they want to ignore that and ensure that, their sponsors are comfortable. So how can we leverage on the need for us to ensure that we have our own continental media outlet that Africans can listen to and be able to know the organs and some of the institutions within the AU and some of the developments. And of course, there's social media nowadays, which we can use. How as civil society, can we have that continental mix to ensure that we promote our own values? And that would be in the short term. And in the long term, how can we as civil society influence the African Union and the Ministries of Education, for example, to address issues of the curriculum? Because most of the things our children are learning from school are westernized. They learn about things from outside. So their interests are not basically within our continent. And you find that even in terms of the way our examinations are done, it's all about competition. So even in governance, the competition that we have is unhealthy because we basically want to outdo one another. So, these are some of the questions I thought could be addressed. Thank you so much.
My name is Ilinanga Chula. I'm in private practice. I'm also a member of the Human Rights and Public Interest Committee for the Law Association of Zambia. My question is a very quick one. It goes to my learned colleague, Emmanuel. I am alive to the fact that the Peace and Security Council are the ones who are in charge of when a member state is non-compliant. And this implementation comes after the fact when there is an unconstitutional government in place and they're trying to restore it into order. My concern really is on two aspects. One is that a perusal of the articles shows that the civil society has to work with the member state for you to be able to move the AU. And that might pose as a challenge in a place where there's conflict. So are there any platforms where the civil society can directly engage with the AU in situations such as that? And secondly, I haven't seen any preventative measures and any implementation that move the AU. So a lot of things talk about after the fact, what they can do to restore peace and order. But as a civil society, we analyze trends, and we also come up with so many documents that show us the warning processes. But where do we then present those trends and the red flags that we see, and what prevention measures are there for us to go to? Because I haven't seen anything in the articles. Thank you very much.
My name, I am Ambassador Dr. Francis Chishala from Global Pan-Africanism Network. I'm the Global Special Rapporteur of people of African descent with disabilities. Before I proceed, Your Excellencies, my heart is bleeding that we have lost more than 200 Africans at Melilla border, Morocco, Spain, who were slain by those forces there, and the African Union is still quiet about it. So I would like all of us to maybe spend a little moment to pay our last respect to our fellow Africans whose lives were terminated by the Moroccan forces. May I also request everyone to be upstanding so that we pay our last respect to our fallen heroes. Let us upstanding. We should be serious here. We are Africans. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Number one, as a Pan-Africanist, I would like to find out from the African Union and its ECOSOCC on the following. Since the formation of the African Union, according to the dictum of the African Union, we all know that it borrowed the philosophy from OAU, which is a Pan-African organization. Now, when we look at what is going on in the African Union, according to us as Pan-Africanists, we've seen the African Union departing from the usual mantra, which our forefathers...
I'm sorry, colleague. In order to save time, don't give us a very long background. Go straight to the recommendation or the question.
Okay. Let me ask the African Union one question. I wanted to find out what is how far has the African Union gone? Because we have been talking about CSOs, ratification, and also accreditation of all the organizations in Africa and in the diaspora. We have been conducting the seminars, the workshops, but we have not yet seen anything relating to the formal accreditation of CSOs in Africa and in the diaspora. Number two, I wanted to find out, like my brother, a fellow African also spoke, regarding the natural resources of this continent. What can the African Union do to legislate or to come up with a policy, a binding policy for all the African states to have one common denominator in terms of a policy that protects the African resources? We are standing here and seated here talking about good governance, democracy, when actually the people of African continent have been exploited for too many years. So what are we going to do as we are seated here? Number 3, the African Union has failed to include the persons with disabilities at the highest level of the African Union. If at all we need to talk about democracy and good governance, and we are leaving out certain people in the work structure of the Continental body, I don't think we should ratify this document called democracy. I submit to the gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to you, the Honorable Dr. Inonge Mpikosita Lewanika, member, eminent panel of APRM.
Thank you very much, moderator. I won't say my name, you've already said it. I want to appreciate all the presentations. And moderator, you had given us a very good lead in the summaries that you were asking questions. My points are two mainly, and I think I have heard them over and over again. And I'm trying to summarize them. One as inclusion. There is a gap between urban and rural areas. Some of the latest technologies, cell phone, unload this gap, they are not existing in the rural areas. There's also a gap between female youth and female male, and male youth. As you can see, even from the presentation, we have heard a lot from the male youth. We are happy about that. But as you know, we lobbied very seriously for the 50-50 gender balance. It has been successful at a commission level, but it needs to go down all the way, even in the civil society, even among the young people. I think we are leaving out a majority of the people who cannot access the modern technology. They are not even able to read the charters. They don't know what's happening. And Africa is built on the involvement of almost all the people, not only those in the city centers. My other concern is also proactive intervention. Our policies and charters make it very difficult for people to intervene. And one organ, and there was a question about other organs. One organ of the African Union is feminist, which is the women of the wise. And if you look at some of the traditions, there were areas where women secretly went to the chamber of the leader and helped him to resolve the challenge that are affecting the people. In some countries, I think we have leaders who are like terrorists. I'm sorry to say that. So they need help. All that the police, the legal, it doesn't work. As somebody has mentioned, they lock up the people if they make a statement. So we really have to look at who else can mediate between the leaders who are not following the rule of law and the people who are being subjected to brutality. I think we need to, who can do it? Because the police can't do it, the judiciary cannot do it, but the people are being brutalized. In most of the traditional systems, there was a way, very polite and very secretive, to take care of the egos and pride. And I see that this is not missing. So we may have all the policies and the charters to protect the people, but when the club is descending on the people, nobody can say anything. I thank you, Mediator.
But I've got a question for each of you in your soul. In your soul. I want you to raise your hand up, but not openly. in your soul? Because a lot of the comments have been around seeking basic information from the AU. Ask yourself in your soul and raise your hand. Have I ever been to the AU website? Raise your hand in your soul. Have I spent 1 hour on it? Raise your hand in your soul. In the last 12 months, have I spent 10 hours on it? Raise your hand in your soul. Apart from the website of the AU Commission, of the other AU organs and institutions, how many of them have I visited their website in the last 12 months? If it is 1, raise your hand. If it is 2, raise your hand. If it is 3, raise your hand. If it is 4, raise your hand. If it is 5, raise your hand. I'll stop there. There are more than that. Twitter handles. Do you know the Twitter handle of the AUC? Do you follow it? Raise your hand. How many Twitter handles do you follow? Okay, let's go to...
My name is David Mvula. I'm the Executive Director for Common Grounds Network here in Zambia. I'd only 2. First and foremost, what I've heard from this platform from the morning is that you are encouraging civil society and civil society leaders to speak up, which is very important. But one of the things I've not heard is what framework protects civil society who speaks up. Because like the commissioner, the eminent commissioner said, she talked about brutality from various force of government. So if a civil society leader speaks up, does the African Union have a framework to support, to ensure that that person's right of expression is upheld? That's one. I've got the last question goes to the African Development Bank. When Zambia hosted the annual meeting, for the first time we heard about civil society engagement. And one of the things I did from my organization is to approach the African Development Bank country office. And really, it was alien for them to receive a civil society institution and in Tuareg, talking about the works of the African Development Bank. My question would be that, what are you doing from the head office to ensure that the country offices or the country team of the African Development Bank, wherever they are set up, are aware in terms of the new approaches which the African Development Bank are coming up with in terms of civil society engagement? Because there were a lot of pronouncements in terms of what civil society could do, like you have speculated in this forum, but lead to do your country office know about it and how to engage civil society in country. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anne Bewe-Anamela, and I'm from Non-Governmental Gender Organizations Coordinating Council. Our observation is that it's not a question or anything, it's an observation, that while we look at all these charters, we look at the ratification, we look at the domestication, let's please ensure that all these take into account gender dimensions and that these are clearly and articulately stipulated in these different documents. I think we all know that when we have issues of unconstitutional change of government, or we have states in transition, the effects on men, women, girls, and boys around these issues are very different. Hence the need to understand the different dimensions. Just a simple example, when these issues happen, there's sometimes a disruption of services such as health services. Imagine women that are expecting babies at that time. Imagine women that need access to contraception. Imagine children that need access to vaccination and other health services. So in all let's have participation and involvement of women in determining what support they need, what responses they need when changes happen, and what preventative measures, even as civil society and as women, can be adopted to ensure that the impacts and the effects are not skewed unfairly towards women and children. Thank you.
My name is Ges Nyirenda. I'm from an organization called Operation Young Vote, basically a youth-focused organization that is championing the engagement and participation of young people. But beyond that, I am from the National Governing Council of the African Peer Review Mechanism, and I'm the spokesperson in country, and that's Zambia. My small comment, which basically will lead into a question, is with regards to the partnership, and probably maybe I should say the engagement between the APRM as one of the organs of the AU and ECOSOCC itself, because I know that there was that robust presentation made or address made by the CEO, Professor Eddie Maloka, which was on point. But mine is how does ECOSOCC engage more or less on a practical level, especially domestically or in country, so that at the end of the day, if ECOSOCC engages or engaged with the NGCs or the National Governing Councils of respective countries, because this is a mechanism that, if well exploited, effectively exploited, would see a situation of probably answering 90% of the challenges that we are grappling with, including the issues of unconstitutional takeover of regimes. So I think we need to find means and ways of how this mechanism, the APRM, can be, shared and understood, or maybe, made aware, the citizens made aware of this particular, process, so that citizens are able to own it. Because if citizens own this particular process and tool, it means that we'll have, better responses to the challenges that we are having, as opposed to having citizens only rubber stamping what goes to the AU and APRM for peer review and so on and so forth. But if at the integral part, the citizens basically own this process, it's a very, very powerful tool that we can use as Africans to be able to get to the Africa that we want, especially that now we have targeted reviews, we have the best review, and targeted reviews are basically meant for all the countries, whether they have acceded to the APRM or not. So how does ECOSOCC engage at that level to ensure that this is done so that we have responses to the challenges that we are having? I thank you.
On behalf of all civil society organizations that are here, I would like just to ask this question on your behalf, if you allow me. And my question goes to my brother, Luther. In regards to the civil society grant from the bank, I would like to know what are the modalities for application, and I'm sure a lot of civil society organizations here would like to know. And also, what are the requirements for an organization in the continent that would like to apply for the grant? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kunda Mutwa. I am the lead community engagement and mobilizer of a female group called Girls Gone Political here in Zambia. And my question is around the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. Article 2 speaks to promoting adherence to universal values and principles of democracy. And I will tell you what, it is the absence of respect for human rights that leads to a coup. So now I want to understand what is it that we're doing to ensure that each state party adheres to these universal principles and declarations. And if they're not, how are you then holding them accountable? Then I will end my submissions with 2 recommendations to the unconstitutional changes of government in Africa. The first one is we need to establish and consolidate a strong democratic institutions in each state parties. The other one is all African Union instruments must be ratified and integrated into national laws, then they can be implemented. Thank you so much.
A very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Nawaki Ruth from the World Association of Women Warriors, World Foundation Zambia. Then I'm also the national champion for the African Continent Free Trade Area. So my question is, I wanted to find out how is the African Union engaging the youths that are championing for the African Continent Free Trade Area, knowing that our African continent is now it has a large number of the youth that are very innovative, the youth that are also promoting trade and industrialization in the African continent. So how is the African Union promoting the welfare of the African continent free trade area? And how are you engaging the young people so that we get to the goal of the Agenda 2063? Thank you.
My name is Jonas Chip. I'm from the University of Zambia. I'm a student there. I'm pursuing a Bachelor of Arts degree in International Relations. My concerns are 2, and there are also questions at the same time. The first one was about the ADEC, which was talked about as we are still pushing for more member states to actually ratify to this particular agreement. We are still cognizant of the fact that human rights abuses are still carrying on and constitutional changes of government are actually occurring. So what happens if certain states decide that they will not ratify to this particular agreement? What steps will the African Union take to actually protect and promote human rights on the continent? Because as much as it is important to actually encourage more states to ratify, but what if they don't ratify because they are sovereign states and they can decide whether to ratify or not? And then my second concern is on sanctions. It was spoken about that sanctions have been used to actually deter states from carrying out certain courses of actions, let's say human rights abuses. But at the same time, the real issue is that sanctions do not affect the leaders or the politician. They affect the common people. Because if sanctions are placed on Zambia, for example, the effect would not be on the president or the ministers. The effects would be on a common person like myself who does not have much. So how is the African Union ensuring that the sanctions that it places on countries do not result in the suffering of the African population? Thank you very much.
My name is Dick Chirwa. So my name is Dixon Chirwa from the mighty University of Zambia. And I'm a law student pursuing a degree in law. And my major concern here is about the unconstitutional changes that we've been experiencing as a whole in Africa. So in as much as we are talking about democracy and respect for human rights, etc., I want to believe that to solve a problem, first and foremost, we must recognize that there is one. So the first challenge or the first problem here is actually coming from the constitutions themselves that we as Africans have actually inherited. For example, I'll give an example of what happened in Kenya, how constitutions have been damaging human rights. The Building Bridges initiative in the case for David Indi versus the people. You find that leaders are deciding things for the common. They are deciding things for the general public, for the people, without considering their interest. So even the coup d'etats that have been coming about is due to the constitutional changes that the people are dissatisfied with. So the military, for example, are not just going to come in and start a coup d'etat when things are just okay. It's because we have got leaders that are trying to foster their selfish motives. And in the end, soldiers will just take it upon themselves to say, let us take over, let us do this, let us do that. So when it comes to constitutions, how best are you going to help individual states? Since it is the African Union, Zambia's got its own issues, Kenya have got their own issues, South Africa have got their own issues. When it comes to constitutions, is there any body that has been instituted to review the constitutions of Africa? I do not wish to waste your time, but I'll also echo the words of Julius Malema, in their campaign to have a united Africa, whereby we can have one constitution, one currency, we can have one government. That one will be better because we are going to be more welcome in other African states. So if each country is dealing with their matters internally, and then there is no intervention from the African Union, then it means that we are going to claim that we are united, but in reality, we are not actually united. And that is a fact. We are not united. When it comes to elections, for example, the African Union will wait. There'll be a lot of malpractices, there'll be this, there'll be that. The African Union will just come to put down the situation after everything has happened. What happened in the last elections for General Museveni?
Please try and keep it brief just because of time.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Bobby Wine competing against Museveni. The African Union was quiet. The man was treated badly in his own country, ran away. The African Union was quiet. And these are the major interests that the African Union should be protecting. So how best are you actually helping out individual states to deal with their individual matters? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That, I think, was a good note on which to end the questions by a tough question to us all, to the various AU organs and institutions, and also to each of us, because in the end, we are the African Union. It's been rich. Many have been questions around seeking more information. Some have been critiques. Some have been observations. Some have been recommendations. Time being of the essence, I'll request each of the panelists to just speak to two brief issues. Then we carry on the rest of the conversation into the rest of the 2.5 days. Thank you. We'll start with Makda, and then Luther, and then Emmanuel.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a lot of questions. I'm not sure if I'll be able to respond to all of it, but you're welcome to come up to me after the discussions and just follow up on your questions and maybe additional, discussions. Just to use my 2 minutes wisely, I would like to mention a bit about the state reporting mechanisms and the challenges that has been raised by my colleague Lily over there. And I want to say just one statement that would probably summarize all of it. For me, for a state reporting mechanism to work well, there needs, beyond technicalities and beyond technocrats, there needs to be a political will. And that political will needs to happen both from the African Union, but also from the member states that is a signatory to the ACTIC. Of course, there is a need for huge capacity. And I think all of the things that you have raised in totality has its core on capacity issues. I'll give you an example. In most of the member states, Ministry of Foreign Affairs or even line ministries, they have probably one person that deals with international treaties. That would include the UN system, but also the African Union. These experts are only one, and they might not be able to deal with a lot all at once. So that's a huge, capacity gap within our member states. African Union itself has more than 60 treaties, conventions that member states need to sign into or have signed into that they need to, incorporate into their own laws. There has been discussions that have been raised on sanctions or suspensions. The suspensions really do not have any economic factor to them. When the country is suspended, as per Article 25 of the AGA, the suspension is to exercise their rights to participate in the activities of the African Union. So it doesn't have any economic issue to that. So you shouldn't be worried. Peace and Security Council, of course, is one of our making organ, and it's policy-making organ, and it's one of its roles is to suspend countries if they are in contravention with ACTEC and other things. For me, I think one of the things I need to mention, bring light on, is a question that has been raised, and I feel like that response would give a lot of the questions the same response as well, is that I know the public sees when Peace and Security Council suspends a country because it's a public event, but there has been or is a lot of back and forth between the countries, regional economic communities where the countries are situated, a lot of shuttle diplomacy that you are mostly likely not aware of. But also our institutional mechanism, the early warning mechanism, engages a lot of civil society organizations in getting different kind of information from the ground. The panel of the wise, and also the mediation and prevention diplomacy missions will be held. But all of those things, I think you would have minimal information on. So you would naturally will think, oh, PSC just sanctions at the end of the day. But a lot goes in the background before that happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As the moderator mentioned, you mostly provided comments and recommendations. Thank you very much. I will just highlight two of your remarks. The first, I will summarize them into what the ma'am here said. Inclusion. Yes, the African Development Bank is promoting inclusion. A lot of you have mentioned youth. The bank has the Job for Youth program, and a call will be open. And the president of the bank has already announced the creation of a bank dedicated exclusively to youth. And this announcement will be reinforced during the upcoming Bank Civil Society Forum announced and scheduled for 6-7 October. We also have a Bank Civil Society Committee, which is organized like the ECOSOCC. I will share the members, the list of members, for you to be able to interact on the different perspectives you are working on. Second thing I would like to highlight is the funding. A lot of you mentioned the necessity for funding CSOs from Africa. I'm really commending this perspective. And as I said, the new Bank Civil Society strategy will encompass a dedicated trust fund, providing funds for local-based CSOs, also what we call mid-level, and then what we can call big CSOs, like you present here. This will take into account the level of representation, the location, the regional perspective, and also balance gender, youth, and other emerging trends like climate change. But I think I will have the opportunity to come back to this in another panel scheduled for Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Let me start with the very important question on the Standing Committee. I think my colleague from Zambia asked about the Standing Committee can play in enhancing national. Question really goes back to the local civil society organizations, because at the ECOSOCC level, CSOs are in their countries, and it is the responsibility of those CSOs to go back home and then create the Standing Committee. I think what we need to enhance really is to ensure that a kind of enhanced communication between the Secretariat, Standing Committee, and those national chapters. I don't think the Standing Committee or the Secretariat will actually go to and create the national chapters. And one thing I want to say is that I think someone spoke about, I think if it's tired now. For a long time, I think ECOSOCC was hosted at CEDAW, which is responsible for that. I think a lot of work has been done to enhance this. The second point which I want to talk about really is the issue about young people. And I think this is a very important component of the questioning that has been coming up. A lot of people don't even understand what the AU stands for, what they do. And you can actually see how that is coming from this conversation. The AU, what are you doing? What do we do? How do we interact? Apart from just website, I think there's really need to devolve the functions of the AU, not just ECOSOCC, because things like ACDEC, this is so important, that young people should be carrying that as a tool, as a weapon for holding, as a tool for holding their government to account. And this brings the issue about ratification. There are countries that have ratified, there are countries that haven't. And I think Sierra Leone was the third country to ratify ACDEC in 2009. But a lot of young people in the country don't even know about it. And this is one of the responsibility of ECOSOCC and its national chapter. How do you cascade this issue so that young people can understand the content? I know, for example, my organization publishes every 3 years. We have a thing which we call Through the Lens of ACDEC, How Governance Has Improved in Sierra Leone. We publish a report which basically assesses this. And I think this is something that other people can also do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to make an apology. I extended my tenure by 53 minutes. So I am in violation of ACDEC. To be honest, I was aided and abetted by about 17 colleagues from the floor, but the truth of the matter is there's been a tenure elongation. So William Keru and his crew will deliberate over lunchtime and tell us what is the punishment for that. Just one question on the youth. I believe that ACDEC mentions and articulates the role of the youth probably about 5 times. And I believe that even the AU Agenda 2063, which is our detailed roadmap around Aspiration 6, actually has measurable matrices on youth inclusion and participation. But we can debate a bit more whether that is not good enough or what we can do. But let me now, in shame, hand over the floor to William Keru and his crew to give us a final word and the marching orders for lunch.
Thank you, Chief. I did not envy you at all. Moderating such a session where there's a lot of interest, it's not easy. But at least you've done a great job together with our panelists, and we want to say a very big thank you. But then before let's appreciate them. It's an important discourse, and I see where the interest is coming from. We need to take center stage in deliberating on some of the issues that pertain to our development and the continent that we want to see. Let me respond to 2 critical questions as we give guidance to for launch. One, I think, is coming from Laura in terms of how can civil society engage with the AU. The frameworks are there, the normative frameworks, the mechanisms are there, and I think we are getting tired of saying we don't lack policies, we don't lack frameworks. Whether they are implemented, practically to the latter, whether we are implementing it partially. What is wrong? Where are we getting things wrong? And I think this is a question that we need to answer. But indeed, in terms of engagement, we have institutional framework. For instance, on peace and security related issues, you have the Livingstone Formula and the Mesori Conclusion in line with Article 20 of Peace and Security Protocol. We also have the accreditation mechanism, and I think somebody was asking about the accreditation mechanism, and the national chapters. And these are mechanisms that can make civil society play their active role at country level. I want to tell you with authority and with confidence, you can take it to the bank, that these are at an advanced stage. We have had a series of consultation, regional consultation across the board, where we have over 2,000 civil society organizations that participate, just to ensure that the output document does not reflect the views of William, but then the views of citizens and themselves at the country level. So it's very important. So both the national chapter and the accreditation mechanism are at an advanced stage, and we're hopeful that by next summit, we will submit for consideration by the member state. The next question was on how ECOSOCC can leverage or work, concertedly with APRM. Indeed, ECOSOCC and APRM have had a very good ride, even in the establishment of the APRM non-state actors. I think we have had a very good working relationship. The first thing we try to understand is the strength and competencies which both institutions are coming with, and how do we leverage on the existing mechanism that we have at country level. For ECOSOCC, the national chapter, and for APRM, the national structures which they also have. And finally, I think a lot has been said, and issues of capacity is never a problem within the civil society space. But the big question is, who occupy these spaces? Are they the real civil society organizations? Are they briefcase civil society organizations? And that is the reason why this meeting, when you look at the composition, we have serious-minded representation. Because most of the time we have this discussion, but they fall in the wrong hands. So you don't expect to get a trickle down. And this is the reason why we need to first and foremost strengthen our umbrella organizations. We have some of them here, like the AXOF, the WAXOF, Donald was talking about WAXI and the likes. We need to ensure that we have credible-based organization with the required competencies to add value into the work that we are doing. A lot can be said, but because of time, we don't want to delve into it. We will have informal interactions, and please bring out your ideas and see how we can enrich the outcome document to see how best your input, your perspective, your understanding will get into that document that will ultimately influence the change that we want. So thank you very much for your participation. You have been very active, and it has been a very participatory process. Let us appreciate ourselves for a job well done. I can save you from all this long back and forth now by inviting you for lunch at a very beautiful place called Chuma Grill. So let's go and have lunch for 1 hour. I want to kindly ask you that we have to really keep time. We are leaving the hall at exactly 1400 hours. We're expecting to be back at 3 so that we'll continue with the afternoon session and make time for the lost period that we have experienced because of the interesting first session. So thank you very much, and you're invited for lunch. And let's be back at 3 so that we continue. Thank you.